Hey, good afternoon. My name is Pastor Dustin Spittler with Vision Baptist Church in Riley, Indiana. Thank you so much for tuning into our Faith Fueled Devotionals. I hope you and your family had a great, happy, and safe time with Christmas yesterday, and all was well with you. I want to continue on in our series here on this Saturday, this idea of enduring temptations, which is the fourth step of maturity in James chapter 1. Last time we saw this great idea of God will reward temptation. Now, not in the sense that God will reward us if we fall into temptation, but that God will reward you if you endure temptation. He will reward you by blessing you. In James chapter 1, verse 12, it says, and also by giving you in the future a crown of life. Today, I want to continue on this thought with how God has given us the rules for temptation in verses 13 and 14. Let me read it for you. It says, let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Here we see two rules for temptation that I'd like to get across this afternoon. The first one is God does not tempt man, and the second one, man tempts himself. God does not tempt man, and man tempts himself. Now, here in my hand, do you know what this is? We call this a fishing lure. This is what we use to catch them big old bass out in the lakes and wherever else we can find them. This is really, when you think about it, an ingenious way of catching fish. You take something that looks like it's safe, something that looks good, and you insert a nice metal hook into the middle of it. So if any fish cares to take a nibble, they will be getting nibbled on themselves later on. And there are temptations out here, this idea of a lure. And inside of every person, there is a fish wanting to take the bait. And when we come to this idea of temptations and the rules of them, the first one is God is not the one out there dangling this for you to bite. God does not want you on a hook. God is not trying to tempt you, as it says here in verse 13, with evil. Neither tempteth he. God is not tempted with evil, and he doesn't tempt any other person. God's not out there susceptible to bait and hooks and temptations. And we are not being baited by him. So if you feel this draw towards sin, it didn't come from God. It came from yourself, who is probably being stirred up by evil in your flesh, or tempted by the world around you, and also the devil, who is behind all these things, who is always trying to be, as he is called in Matthew chapter 4, the tempter. So we got to be careful. So if you're feeling a temptation to do something wrong, to do something that is against what you know to be right, something that you maybe have put away for a long time, but all of a sudden now you're entertaining these thoughts again, they did not come from God. God does not tempt man with evil. This word tempt does mean to be tested. And within the context of this passage, I would like just for a moment to tell you that there is a difference between trials and temptations. Well, what would those differences be? Think about that for a second. What's the difference between a trial and what's the difference between being tempted? Well, a couple things. A trial does come from the outside and moves into our lives. And oftentimes temptations come from within us and try to draw us away on the outside. Sometimes trials, and oftentimes trials, if we succeed in them, bring life. And temptations, when they are fulfilled, bring death. Trials will bring you to faith and maturing faith, and temptations will bring you to the maturity of not faith, but of sin. And so we got to be very careful here. And one of probably the most famous passages in the Bible, when you think about this, a lot of people think about it, is in Genesis chapter number 2. Remember the story of Abraham and Isaac? It says in Genesis 22 that God came to Abraham and he tempted him. Now you say right there, that's a direct contradiction of Scripture. It says in the King James Bible that God tempted Abraham. Well, think about this. Was he tempting Abraham to do evil, or was he tempting Abraham to do good? And that's really how you have to look at temptations and trials, and they can be used interchangeably. You know, you can see a temptation in your life and you can look at that as a trial, or you can see a trial in your life and look at it as a temptation. The words can be used interchangeably and are often in the Bible. But here's what you need to understand. God is not trying to get you to do wrong. He's trying to get you to do right. And it's not wrong to say that God may be putting a fishhook out there not to get you to do evil, but to get you to be a part of righteousness. And so that's one way to look at it. God is not trying to bring you to do something that is against Scripture. Never will. He never will. And if we do feel this desire to do wrong, to violate Scripture, it didn't come from God. It came from us. Because in verse 14 it says, every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. This word drawn away is kind of like when you got a fish on the line. You're dragging him in as you are reeling. Every man is being reeled in by his own lusts, his own longings. You and I long for things that are not biblical, and we have to be so careful of that, all right? We need to be so careful, and we are enticed by them. They dangle in front of us, and they look shiny, and they look good, and they become traps for us. And I think it is also well to be said, you know, don't let your trials weigh you down and allow you to become susceptible to temptations. Sometimes people have so much weight on their shoulders, and there are so many burdens that they're carrying, that these temptations to do wrong start to look a little bit easier to fall into. And James is really telling in this whole context, don't let your trials, lead you down the way of temptation. Let your trials lead you down the path of becoming more and more like Christ. And that's why Jesus said in what we call the model prayer, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And that's something that you can pray. God, allow me not to fall for these things that are out there to do wrong. Allow me to mature in my life and do what is right. So I ask you today, as a friend, somebody made out of the same flesh and blood that you are, does this look enticing to you? Well, no, it doesn't. But sometimes things that are ugly and nasty start looking better and better when things start getting weighed down. Don't take the bait, friend. Don't take the bait. Draw close to God and let Him bless you and endure temptations. Hey, we'd love to have you at our church tomorrow. We're having our services at 11 a.m. and 6 p.m. on Sunday. Come and see us. We'd love to meet you and your family and worship with you. Have a great day. God bless you.